Hi, Tali. I'm super glad to have you on the podcast for the first time, actually, not the second time because I messed up the recording. Can you introduce yourself a bit to the audience and tell us a bit about your background?
Yeah, of course. Thank you for having me. I'm Tali Remennik, data scientist, certified professional forecaster, and CEO here at Granularity. My background is as a management consultant at Accenture, where I built and deployed massive AI use cases for organizations across North America. And one of the challenges that I was seeing at one point during COVID, which a lot of people can relate to in the forecasting and planning space, was the ability to forecast given the market changes. So we're now moving from a demand push to a demand pull environment where consumers really know what they want and what they're looking for. And it's our responsibility as organizations to really be able to keep up with consumer demand. And that's a shift that we saw during COVID and that has progressed since. So here at Granularity, we focus on demand forecasting for those consumer shifts.
Cool, cool, cool. And can you explain us a bit, in current supply chain, like post COVID, what's actually are like the challenge that you see? You talked about a pull versus a push motion, but what are the challenge that are visible?
So in the new digital economy, consumers has escalated the way consumers shop both in store and online. And consumer preferences are shifting rapidly. The challenge we've seen, a major challenge, is that ERPs are not built for this new digital economy. And they work fantastic for a lot of products, but there's a lot of products that are really being impacted by the way consumers are now shopping. So we need a way to be able to keep up with demand patterns that are fundamentally different, and our ERP systems aren't able to do that at this point.
Okay, cool. Can you dive a bit more about like why exactly the ERP are not made for that, and what actually is the missing pieces? Because in my case, in my experience, more on the like outsourcing side than the demand side, I've seen a similar setup where like simple things like keeping all the prices for an RFQ that you're doing is actually not possible. It's a bit counterintuitive because if you had all of this information, then you could take more better decision in the future. But like some of the ERPs are just made so that you have one price and then you flatten it. But in your case, on the demand side, what exactly is the missing pieces here?
The models that planners use for consumer demand are struggling to keep up with the way that the economy is changing. So, if I'm a planner using an ERP system, I typically select the model that builds out my plan. And the challenge is those models don't take into account a lot of factors that are happening in the external environment. So they're called univariate models, which means they're only looking at one variable, which is the units sold. But really, there's so many variables that impact demand. And there's many more now. So we need our tools, and usually AI helps with this, but that's getting into the solution. But we need tools that can actually look at the thousands of variables that impact the way consumers shop. For example, if we want to be very concrete, there's a huge company that sells jackets, which we all know, but essentially their demand planning model wasn't able to even take into account seasonality. Like each season, if I have a new type of jacket that I didn't have in my system before, my system won't be able to predict for that because that jacket only exists starting 2 months ago. I didn't have that jacket last year. So there's not those tools don't really work for seasonal products because they're used to, modeling something that we've been selling for 10 years. So it has all that historical data. It doesn't work well for seasonal products.
That we're getting completely off track here. I think um, I think we're touching on a fundamental problem, and I just realized it a bit. Um, a lot of these tools, especially like in big organization, are kind of like made by huge corporation, which have absolutely no incentive of like making their software go and then change fast. We can think about like the ACP of the world and whatnot. Usually it's difficult to implement and then it's difficult to modify. But they're really made like as a bedrock software. It like you're saying it's still like made for the reality of 10 years ago. Because that's what the software is made for and can't really change past that point. It's too fast for the software to keep up. And it's kind of a similar thing that I've seen with supply chain management is that uh, like the ERPs are made for like a buyer market, um, a buyer
Yeah.
market where things are not that complicated, and then you just are to have to optimize for price, and that's pretty much it. But like all of the change from like the COVID period and whatnot, there's nothing like you look at the software at this point and then before, it's the same thing. And the reality is that it's very hard to change a software that big with that history is will be difficult to change. So it's much easier to have that bedrock software augmented by
Yeah, exactly.
some other
I
module,
completely agree.
because that module don't have to have like all of the backbone
Yep.
needed for this massive operation to run. It just need to do this thing well. So this thing can change fast, but the other thing cannot. Um,
Yeah,
it's
and
just
and the products, it still works really well. The ERP system still, can model really well products that are consistent. It's just we're seeing more of our portfolio of products
yeah.
being completely inconsistent, whereas before maybe 10 to 20% of our products were had variable demand, and then 80% were quite predictable. Now we're seeing more 40-60,
Yeah.
depending on obviously what industry you're in, and what domain your products are in. So now we really need to focus more on improving the accuracy of those 30 to 40% of products that are seeing variable demand, because if we are inaccurate on those, then our margin across the board is completely off. And that was a challenge we were seeing during COVID, and it is still continuing. So what we focus on is improving the accuracy of those 30 to 40% of products that are seeing completely inconsistent and wacky demand, and helping
Yeah.
you understand what is the source of that inconsistent demand.
Okay, cool. Love it. I think we're getting some cool insight already. Yeah, can you provide a bit of an example of like some type of organization that are properly leveraging demand forecasting? Like in your opinion, I think you have one. Yeah, I think you have a good one.
Yeah, so in terms of demand forecasting, there's an organization that sells bath and body type of products. And what they've started to do is use demand forecasting as a competitive advantage by meeting weekly. So they do weekly planning as opposed to monthly planning. And in those weekly planning meetings, they bring together stakeholders from marketing, from their website team, from their ad spend team. And they all come together each week and they look at the plan and they look at what types of scents are selling much worse than they expected and which ones are doing better. And they actually adjust their inventory planning based on what's happening week over week. And they're still doing it far out, but they do have a little bit more of that flexibility, and because of that, they're seeing a 10 to 20% higher margin than their competitors.
That's
Uh, yeah, so the flexibility is a really key competitive advantage. And that's why we're seeing more move to weekly planning review meetings.
yeah. It made me remember a discussion I had with someone at Bombardier actually, that told me like exactly that same motion happening at the not at the demand phase but at the outsourcing phase, where as things get more and more complex, the best thing you can have and do is work on your communication. internally with the internal
Yeah.
team in order to pinpoint exactly what the motion and the movement is, especially if like the stuff are moving like on a weekly basis. If the stuff are like a big trends that happens over a quarter, I mean, it's not that relevant to have these type of meeting. But like focusing on communication when things are moving fast is absolutely critical, and this is how you're going to be able to figure out what actually need to tweak and change. Um,
Yeah, it's about those little tweaks. And I think that's one thing we're working on with customers is knowing what levers we can pull. Because yes, there's not going to be, a million things we can do in a short period of time, but there's probably 2 to 3 key levers that we have to pull, whether that's, pricing, promotional strategies, or, adjusting 10% of our budget within season. That looks different for every single organization. But the very first step is having meetings. So, I mean, that's unfortunate because there's a lot of trend towards less meetings. But in this case, to have that agility, there needs to be cross functional meetings that are happening in
yeah,
which we say what levers are we pulling and why.
yeah, definitely. Yeah, it's funny because like you eliminate all meetings, including like the super critical ones. But yeah, at this point, it's not having a less meeting that matters. It's just like removing those that can be done asynchronously. And I know that because I'm running a fully remote company. We do have meetings, but they are very targeted meetings.
Yeah.
So if we
It's like we're
can,
talking about these three, or we have 5 metrics that we're
yeah,
all meeting about. One metric is from marketing, one metric is from supply, one metric from procurement, and we all know exactly those are the 5 things we're talking about.
yeah,
That's a productive meeting.
exactly. A cross-functional meeting is always very productive because especially if you're trying to fix something or like you have a challenge that you have to tackle. Trying to do that asynchronously is like it's gonna be a disaster. It's gonna take too long, especially if it's time sensitive. You're much better to have people for 10 minutes, just like blitzing this through, and then you move on, and then you don't have to do status report meetings, but I can do that brainstorming meeting and then
To
ideation.
actually solve problems.
Yeah, exactly.
But I
Okay,
think what we're trying to get to also is not finding problems after they've happened. So we
exactly.
can't wait until the end of quarter to realize that our pricing was wrong or, we're losing margin on something. We need to all move towards being able to be flexible and actually move as things are changing.
That's beautifully well put. Um, that was actually that was beautiful. So now the question is like it's kind of obvious like you do more communication, and yes, your ERP system will not save you because it's too slow. It's made for a slower type of environment. Um, why are organization not leveraging like the demand forecasting tool?
A lot of organizations are excited about implementing new processes and new capabilities, specifically around AI in demand forecasting. The challenge often is actually with adoption, and people like myself, like planners and forecasters, being reluctant to adopt AI. So, really, it's up to all of us as individuals to learn how AI works, part of it is machine learning, and how that impacts forecasting. And we talked a bit before between ourselves that, machine learning fundamentally is very similar to what demand forecasters are already doing. It's emulating the same activities. And underlyingly, it's all statistical models, but we get scared because we don't really know, we feel like it's a black box. But there are a lot of resources and tools out there to start learning what is behind a lot of those black boxes. And I encourage a lot of the planners out there to start looking into that technology and just finding at least a couple of training resources on it.
Okay, I think you're touching on an interesting point, and I want you to make clear which part of the adoption are you talking about here? Is it like the tool
Yeah, good
adoption,
question.
or is it the whole concept that the tool are using adoption, like machine learning in general, or literally the technology?
I'd say it's individual users on the ground being reluctant to use
Okay.
new tools because sometimes the tools can be wrong, which is completely a fair reason, at least in the forecasting side. So, the recommendation I have for forecasters and planners listening to this is to go on the Institute of Business Forecasting. They have a lot of resources specifically around machine learning and understanding how AI and machine learning augment forecasting. And we all need to have that fundamental knowledge before we can use the tools.
Okay. Okay. Perfect.
So it comes down to not understanding what's behind the tool,
Yeah.
which is fine. I think that's a fair concern. But there need to be resources. We all need to go out and get the knowledge we need to understand what's behind the tools.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. I get that. And it's a fair point also, because if like you get burned by the tool because you thought you could do like that, and actually like you didn't understand that there was this limitation, um, it's a fair reason, especially if like it's a machine learning model tool, which you have no idea how it works, because it's not magic. Um, you're
And
a
I
big,
understand the concern. I think that it's
yeah.
not magic. None of the tools are perfect. But we as individuals need to challenge ourselves to understand what's behind them. That's the only way forward.
So to that point, you're a big proponent of upskilling. Is it for this? Is it for this reason to be able to have more adaptation, therefore clearing that gap between the fastness of the market and what is actually needed by the team? Why are you so such a big proponent of upskilling?
Yeah, I would say that the biggest challenge we've seen to AI in demand forecasting is adoption. So leaders are really excited, and actually, leaders do invest in AI tools and in building AI models. But the challenge always comes when there's a mismatch between the AI models that are built and the planners on the ground. That is the biggest gap that we've seen. And oftentimes it's because the AI models that are built don't work the way they need to and the way that planners need them to. So, in order to bridge that gap, um, we as planners need to upskill on AI. And then, of course, people building the AI need to upskill on who their users are. And like, that's the only way we can find a middle ground between the two.
Yeah, perfect. Love that. A tangential question. Um, um, what's the place of observability in these type of model, especially for demand forecasting? Because you can have a wide range of transparency in a machine learning model. You have like the decision tree model that literally you can plot it and literally know what's up, and then you have like the deep neural network model where like it will take you a PhD level in order to figure out what each of the layers are doing. Um, what's your what's your take on this topic, especially for demand forecasting? I went on a tangent here.
Yeah, transparency, it depends on every single tool has their own way of explaining the models behind. One way we see is actually showing the data underlying and how what spikes have moved. So oftentimes the problem is we don't know. So we'll see a sales spike in our history and we have no idea where that sales spike is coming from. And then we just keep forecasting forward. Either we ignore it or we make some assumptions about it. What we do at Granularity is we actually bring in the data that helps you understand where that spike
Mm,
came from so that you can say, hey, are we going to see that again? Like whether maybe it's a weather change. Are we going to see that weather change again or not? If we expect that we are going to see that weather change again, then we can forecast it forward. A lot of the times we just ignore the
yeah.
spikes or the changes. And the problem is that in this market currently, outliers are extremely important. We need to
Yeah.
understand our outliers. We can't just take them out.
Okay, I love that. That's a really great answer. Because like you can always figure out which features that came into the model had which impact. I was actually doing this during my PhD. It was for brain data, but like it was kind of the same thing
Yeah,
because
like the
it's
features.
fun. It's fun to know that you are able to have that much accuracy to do X, but it's even more fun to understand which the composition of the feature space actually led to that, because then you can focus and refine both the model but also your understanding about what the heck is going on.
Yeah, and that's exactly what like our goal at Granularity is to help you understand what's going on behind the data points, because a lot of us are just focusing on the final sales numbers
Yeah,
without understanding what's behind them. So there's a lot of funny things that come. For example, sometimes it is just from promotional spend, but we've even seen the case where going back to the ERP systems, you can't actually put in your promo to say like we had a promotional period here. So you have to do that in you
yeah,
have to go to Excel and say this was a promotional period, and then I have to emulate that promotional period. Depends on the ERP systems, but there are some ERP systems that don't let you do that automatically. So you do it in Excel. There's also ones that don't even have pricing. So like the model just builds it without the price point. And I was talking to someone in grocery that was like, well, obviously the sale of strawberries is dependent on the price of the strawberries. But the model doesn't show that.
yeah.
It just goes by units. So I can't even have a multivariate model, which is simple economics.
Yeah,
So
but
that's when
like
I was like, okay, this is really a problem. When I realized that the ERPs don't have pricing, some of them.
it's crazy. Like
Yeah.
it looks like it looks completely bonkers when you look at it from the outside. You're like, why are you, like is this company running it this way? And you look at the software and like, why is it done this way? But then, like, I've also talked to a bunch of people that were actually building ERPs, and then one thing that they absolutely hate is when their customers from this or this niche are asking them about doing this for a module, because for them it's just pure headache. Because it doesn't necessarily mean that the people that are bought this ERP for the strawberry stuff, the feature that they're gonna build
Yeah.
will be translatable to the others customers. So then they have to kind of balance this thing out. And what happens is that they're gonna make a very average module, and then no one will be happy, but the thing will be done. So they actually much prefer partnering up with another outside software and then just making the connection. And then a lot of the ERP system are kind of transitioning toward that mode of
Yeah.
operation, instead of like having to deal with like all of these ad hoc type of requests. And now when you look at this in this sense more economically, it makes sense. They don't make that much money from these requests, and they actually
Yeah.
lose that in the customer support. It's much better if the customers are happy, and then you have to do nothing but to provide an API to whatever company that made that customer happy.
And that's why we are working on partnerships as well, because there's a need for demand sensing, which is what we're talking about. But the companies that are the ERPs, they have so many other priorities because they're trying to build like a whole backbone for the organization, which is why I don't take away the fact that the ERPs work amazing for a lot of foundational, like you said, it is the foundation. So again, I don't think either of us are taking away from the importance of that foundation. We're just saying when it comes to, AI forecasting or demand sensing, that's just not their priority because they
Yeah,
have to
yeah.
do so many other things. So that's where we come in, and obviously that's why integrations are important.
Love it. Is to go back to the upskilling topic. Um, like if you like, we're talking to a bunch of people that are in supply chain right now. What are the core topic you think that they should like kind of master in order to be able to understand these models, and just to be able to understand the opportunity that a good demand forecasting tool give them?
So, in term for demand forecasting specifically, the Institute of Business Forecasting has some tools and training on um, different methods of statistical forecasting, and they go through the foundations behind machine learning. So they maybe don't get into machine learning and AI, but they cover the foundations that are
Okay.
very important. So I'd say for forecasting, that's a resource I would go to, but every domain probably has a different resource.
Perfect. I think it's a good starting point. Like, because I've been teaching machine learning to a bunch of people also for a while, and one thing you don't want someone is completely lose them in the weeds of it. I usually start the curriculum
Yeah.
with anyone to go from the top and then go down afterward if they need to, but never, never, never to start from the bottom and then just throw them into like a linear algebra course for like 3 months and lose them.
And especially now, I think though we need to regroup in 2 months or 3 months, because just like we talked about flexibility in other fields, this field is evolving so rapidly
Yeah.
that I don't even know what at this point is going to be foundational and what types of skills we're going to need. Because I know we needed machine learning as a skill set, and I was going to say functional expertise. So machine learning for forecasting is really powerful. Machine learning for supply chain, like getting the right vertical that you're in. But now with AI, it's changing so rapidly that we might have a different answer in a few months.
Yeah, yeah, I do agree here. And like, it could do create some new paradigm shift in ways of understanding, like how to tackle different problem. Like if we just talk about Gen AI, for instance, like 2, 3
Yeah.
years ago, that type of motion of just like jamming stuff onto a LLM and then getting something out and then just doing that, like it didn't really exist that much. But then we started with code, and then you could do that, and it spit out like the actual code that you need because it saw a lot of it. Now this motion exists, and it's it can be used and composed in various different ways. But I do agree, like you have to stay flexible. One thing though that I've realized by doing a lot of this is that it's not really hard to catch up if you already are invested in some form in this topic. So, for example, if you already did machine learning for whatever it is, like even like machine learning for molecular biology, all of these skills are really transferable because it's really like the mindset and the way you're thinking about it. Important. That's the important part. The rest,
Yeah, having the like understanding that underlyingly a lot of it is statistical modeling.
yeah,
And if you understand the statistical models, which a lot of forecasters and planners really that's what their bread and butter is, then you'll
yeah,
understand machine learning.
yeah,
What I am seeing more of though is the generative AI, which you don't necessarily need to have a machine learning background or a statistical forecasting background or a forecasting background to use.
no background
Like you don't
at
need
all.
any background, you don't need any math, science, like you don't need anything. So I'm
Yeah,
not sure. That's why I'm saying I don't know how it will evolve, in the sense that I don't know. No one really knows what skills exactly we're going to be needing in order to develop um, new models. But
yeah.
I think for forecasting and supply chain, a lot of it will still be machine learning based.
I do believe too on that front, especially since like you don't have that much barrier for like error or creativity in that type of setting. Like if we're talking Gen AI, it usually thrive more when you have like this kind of error bar that you can have. But in demand forecasting, I think that's not the case. Cool, perfect.
Yeah, exactly. It's not like creativity, it's literally math underlying. So
It's the
I don't know
opposite.
if I don't know. I mean, I'm sure it'll still touch the
Yeah.
field, and we are
It,
using generative AI to process the data,
yes,
like to
that's it.
understand different pieces of the data that we're using, because we're
Yeah.
using a lot of unstructured social media data. So for us, it is useful and important, but we're still looking at statistics and statistical modeling just as
Exactly.
much.
Yeah, that's what I was about to say. You can use that chunk in the processing stage so that you can ingest a lot of like natural language and
Yeah.
then actually make something out of it that is digestible for your actual model that cannot have that much creativity, but will use like whatever
Yeah.
your other model is having.
That's the right
Um,
summary. Exactly.
if we geeked up a bit too much on that point. But on your background, you're a data scientist. Um, if we touch just a bit more on that upskilling thing, like what did your learning path look like from like not knowing that much to actually be at the position that you are right now, where you can actually make have a good understanding of demand forecasting.
It's really a lot of pieces, but I think it starts with finding a starting point. That's the biggest piece of advice. So there's so many resources out there, but choosing one or two resources. Hopefully, your organization has some starting points for you. And I think more and more organizations are having training, but just finding your one starting point
Yeah.
and spending a couple months with just that starting point. For me, it was the Python side. Like I knew foundationally, that's the first part. I already had a statistics background, so I had that side of it, but the coding side was what I had to learn first.
Yeah.
So I started there and just basically once you lay a foundation, you just keep growing on it. Most people, the biggest challenge is knowing where to start.
Yeah. Yeah, that's it. I think you nailed it pretty well. Um, it's really iterative. It's because like there's so many niche and there's so many different type of machine learning that you can use and whatnot, depending on the problem. There's just no way you're going to learn all of it
Yeah.
in a structured fashion until you built up to knowing it all in order to do the stuff. That's what I was saying at the beginning, and that's why I liked your answer about like just do that course and know the basics just for domain forecasting, and that's it. That's a start. Go there. If you start from top and exactly what you're trying to do, like that, be better at demand forecasting using AI, just start there. Don't try to start from the bottom and then try to learn like
Yeah, don't try to
the
learn everything. Just try to learn, but I think sticking to one or two resources
yes,
that work well for you, like
yes,
whether maybe it's a Udemy course on AI and demand forecasting. It depends where you want to start and what you want to learn. Some people want to learn purely coding. Some people want to learn, data visualization, and some people want to learn AI and demand forecasting. Like decide what you want and then stick to one resource end to end. At
yeah.
least that's what works well for me. I like to kind of find a place, finish one good learning resource, and then explore from there.
Yeah, and I think you need to get to push yourself to the point where you can actually do something versus just being passive and getting that information. I think that's the point where you realize, okay, but the motion is this, and then you're able to like to make it click the actual motion of machine learning, just like the motion
Yeah.
of coding,
Yep.
just like the motion of like doing
Yeah.
stats, like
It's like a language. It's like just
exactly. It's like a way of thinking about the problem, and then you understand that it has this shape. There's this thing in the middle, right? And then you're gonna entrain this thing by giving it stuff, and then you're gonna ask it to like predict this other stuff that it doesn't see, and then you make this thing a bit better because you're fine tuning it. Then you take that thing and then you put it where you want actually to where you don't know the stuff that you have at the end, and then you can retrain it and blah blah blah. But like that motion is not the same motion you do when you're coding something without machine learning. Like when you're actually coding like step by step, it's a different type of mental frame. But like you just have to
yeah.
push yourself to get something out where you actually did the whole motion. And if you're able to do that, then that's kind of it. Like after that, you can learn any subfield of machine
Yeah, you
learning.
can go deeper into
You can
each
go.
one.
You
You
can
just
go
need to
deeper,
understand one
take
area
the
first.
whatever context and whatever utility you want to get out of it, and you're going to be able to figure it out because you saw the whole motion. And it's strange because it's such a big field, but it's always kind of the same, right? No matter what type of machine
It's
learning you're
like
doing.
cooking, right? Like once
Exactly.
you learn one recipe, okay, it's not what you can learn baking or you can learn like cooking, but once you do one, baking activity end to end, then you kind of understand it and then you copy it multiple times. But the
Exactly.
first time you do it, you're going to be like, how do I do this? How what do I even have measuring cups?
That's
Like
it.
what do I have?
Yeah.
So yeah, but then the second recipe will become easier and easier. But I
Yeah.
do think it's up to leaders at organizations to help uh, people that are excited about learning new things to find a starting point.
Yeah.
And I think that's where there is a lot of challenge. And of course, it's really hard to. It's such a growing field. It's evolving every day, so it's hard to find a starting point. But I think leaders are really excited about bringing in AI and upskilling their teams, and we're seeing more and more of that because they want their teams to have that knowledge. So leaders at your organization are, we're all working to give people a starting point. And I don't know if Axia has training modules as well, but I know there's more and more training out
Yeah.
there.
Yeah, there is, and it's absolutely crucial. You're totally right. I was talking to someone that was at Rio Tinto, and that was actually upskilling herself with the help of the company. um, and it's fantastic because like you're developing that capability internally, and then this person is able to like show the other person how things are done, and then it's just organically you're able to have like a better prepared organization. And with these type of skills, the other thing is that if you look at historically where the data scientists and like those type of people are coming from, like the machine learning engineer and whatnot, there was no stream of machine learning
Yeah,
in
exactly.
university. It's a bunch of people that were doing PhD and masters on in weird stuff, like they were
And then it
studying.
got called like machine learning later.
Yeah,
Or like data
exactly.
science. Like, what is data science? I don't know.
That's
I
it.
just did statistics and then I learned how to code, and you put those two together, and that's data
And then
science.
you're off to
But
the
I'm not,
races.
people don't, yeah, exactly. But
Yeah.
organizations and leaders are really excited to get more and more people upskilled. And I know quite a bit of organizations now who are using internal talent because it's also hard to get, talent in AI and demand forecasting. So, let's train people that are already excited to learn it.
Beautifully said. So, to kind of end this podcast, do you have any emerging trends or technology that you see that are promising to enhance the potential of demand forecasting? I think we touched a bit on some. Like, can you like recap all of this? Um,
Yeah, as I said, we're seeing a large shift in consumer preferences moving faster. We're seeing, monthly and weekly shifting preferences. So tools that can really provide flexibility are what we're seeing more of. Tools and capabilities in, again, understanding what's happening in the consumer market and how that impacts our products and our um, internal plans.
Perfect, fantastic. I think that summarized it pretty well. Um, Tali, that was amazing. I think there's a lot of good nuggets in there of information. Where can people reach out to you if they want to learn more about demand forecasting?
Yeah, so you can reach me at on LinkedIn, Tali Remennik. That's the best way to reach me. But you can also send me an email at tali.remennik@granularity.ca.
Perfect.
And I'm sure we'll include it below as well.
I will include it below. No worries about it. So, Tali, thank you very much for this podcast. It was pretty fun. We went into a few tangents, but I think it was all worth it. And this was the Data Driven Supply Chain Podcast with Tali Remennik.